Have you ever wondered what it is about the Torah that makes it so, something that we still hold on to ever so tightly? We grasp at it. And yet parts of it are foreign, strange, and don't really even speak to us. Every single year when we arrive at Parshat Bahar, this week's Torah portion, usually at least one person comments on Bahar and Rabbi Bahar. Yes, it's the same name. Yes, probably from the same place. Thank you for pointing it out. But more than that, when we look at this week especially and specifically, it connects to the land. There's a lot of mitzvot around the land. Shemitah, the idea that every 7 years we let it rest. The Jubilee is discussed. And yet, for much of our existence, at least part of our community didn't live in the land. The rabbis, even coming out of the destruction of the Second Temple, struggled and tried to make some connection with, if it says Eretz, it's land, and Adamah is other land and earth, and when do we follow it, and if the mitzvah is dependent on the land versus just agricultural land. In Masechet Kiddushin, exactly, they try to define it even further. And the Talmud uses Deuteronomy to do it. These are the laws and rules that you must carefully observe in the land, Eretz, that God, the Lord of your fathers, is giving you to possess as long as you live on the earth. So in the end, after the rabbis love to have multiple conversations, it rests as long as you live on the earth, which means that many of the mitzvot apply in all of the lands, is how they address it. So it's not just the land of Israel. But it also begs us to question what our relationship is to the land. And Baruch Spinoza, being the good Jewish heretic that he was, also had similar questions of what was so special. And for him, the law, he says, quote, the law revealed by God to Moses was simply the laws of the Hebrew state alone, and was therefore binding on none but the Hebrews, and not even on them except while their state still stood, meaning it didn't apply to us. You wonder why he was considered a heretic, but he had the courage to say that in print in Theological Political Treatise in the preface. When we sit and we look at all of the promises that God promised us, if you remember, God said we were going to be as numerous as the stars in the sky and sand on the seashores. There's not that many Jews. There's only about 14 of us. And yet, all of these promises and all of these mitzvot, we still are somehow deeply attracted to this sacred work. And it got me thinking, what is it about it? I think part of it is that we wrestle with it, we ponder it. And even when we were having a conversation in Kiddush Club about, frankly, the brutality of the Babylonians toward the Israelites at the end of the First Temple, we realized and came to the conclusion that brutality is brutality is brutality. We haven't changed all that much over the years. But even more so, it got me thinking further that not just the brutality, but there's something fundamentally human about it. Not the brutality, but the need for rest that I think is brought up in this week's Parsha specifically. And I think one of the reasons why we read it. After all, if you think about it, what did we just do? Well, if you were living in the land of Israel, you will have been working hard planting the barley harvest if you have an agrarian mindset. But more than that, maybe you're even, like me, slightly disconnected from the land. I used to go hiking all the time, and now I don't as much. Now I'm lucky, I've got my earbuds in, and right at the moment, I'm like listening to some lecture or podcast, and I happen to look up and notice a bird chirping, a red or blue jay or something. And it reminds me that I'm actually walking out in nature because I'm on cement. How often are we disconnected? And maybe that's what the Shemitah is about. Maybe that's why we read it. Maybe that's why we struggle with it. Maybe that's what we're supposed to do, is recognize that we need a break from all of our technology and recognize that we need to get back in touch with the land. Just to be clear, the whole concept of the Shemitah was in and of itself radical, even by ancient Near East standards. An agrarian society depended on the land to produce the food, and we're told to let it rest. This requires immense faith. It says, I'm going to put all of my stock into God and believe that even when it's resting and we're only picking the seeds that naturally fell on the ground and produced some plants as a side benefit, that I'll have enough stored up and God will provide enough. One reason, by the way, for why this was a radical concept was the decline of the Neo-Sumerian economy in Mesopotamia in the early second millennia. In case you were curious, fascinating how civilizations rise and fall, but they declined because of the high alkaline content of the soil, specifically in the areas of the Diyala River region. Irrigation was overutilized, crop output faltered, and thus the economy failed, and we saw the end of that society. So it's not as if the Shemitah was then a normal concept. It was radical, which is why it's radical for us to put our phones down and maybe, if we want to, take a Shemitah from TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and whatever else it is that we're on, or X. Maybe that's what we need to do. Maybe we take a Shemitah from something else in our lives that we're putting so much effort in. I don't know about you, but the fact that I have my cell phone means that I can get phone calls 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with the expectation that I'll return the call right away. And maybe it's a good idea to put the phone down. Maybe that's why we read the Bible, that we're reminded of the radical concepts that, yes, some of these laws are intended for a land that we don't live on currently. Maybe it's because some of these laws are intended for a time that's not anymore, but they're still dealing with our human struggle. The struggle for constantly working and constantly toiling away. The struggle that puts us in a way, once we look at our phone, over-connected, and yet at the same time, overly disconnected from the world around us. So yes, the concept of Shemitah is foreign. Yes, it sounds like it's from a Bible that for some of us doesn't necessarily even make sense. But I think if we were actually to try it out, like a piece of clothing to put it on, we might find that it gives us the respite that it is intended. Instead of a physical one to the land, more of a spiritual and emotional one from the craziness of our incessantly, never stopping, produce, purchase, get that best shot on Instagram society, for us to, I don't know, check out the cool, beautiful birds around us and the smiling faces on our family nearby us. Shabbat Shalom.